All right. Hello, everyone. I see that people are still filtering in, so I'm just going to give things a minute before we get started here. So glad to see you all this afternoon. Hope everyone is, well, if you're anywhere near campus of UMD, staying dry, staying warm. All right. Well, let me see. Diana, do you want to get started here?
All right. Well, thanks
Let's
again,
do it.
everybody. And again, happy snow day to those of you who got a snow day. Happy rainy day for those of us who are out in the cold rain. So great to be here together this afternoon. So I'm Diana Marsh. I'm an assistant professor in archives and digital curation here at the College of Information, and co-director with Jess here of the Center for Archival Futures. CAFE was established in 2021 as a group of interdisciplinary researchers and practitioners from the iSchool and beyond, looking at archives and digital curation, but conceived really broadly. And we're collectively interested in processes and institutions and systems that care for collections and archives and digital data over time. And we take lots of different approaches and community and human-centered approaches to doing that work. This is our flagship speaker series. So again, thank you so much for being here. We ordinarily hold this on the first Wednesday, but we've moved this back one day for this special event. And we're really eager throughout this series to host speakers at the cutting edge of various forms of research and practice and some of these core issues that intersect across a lot of our various fields, of which the public domain is one. You can find all of our previous recordings at our website, and I will post the link momentarily and hand it over to Jess.
Already done. All right. So thanks so much again for being here. Today we are beaming in from College Park, Maryland, which is located on the ancestral territories of the Piscataway, Nacotchtank, and their indigenous kin and neighbors. As members of the University of Maryland, we acknowledge as a land-grant university the 202,000 acres of stolen indigenous land taken and distributed to the university under the Morrill Act in 1862. We want to acknowledge the separation that these and many other acts of colonialism, assimilation, and genocide, which included archival collecting, generated between Indigenous peoples and their homelands. We honor the continued power and resilience of Indigenous communities and nations and celebrate the collaborative and decolonializing work now taking place in our collections and our institutions. We further acknowledge the University of Maryland's connections to slavery and to generations of racialized trauma rooted in the institution. As a member college of universities studying slavery, the University of Maryland has undertaken the 1856 Project, committed to investigating and illuminating these histories. The 1856 Project endeavors to lay a path forward towards restorative history, allowing for the institution to engage in the work of moral accountability and reconciliation. Through this work, the University of Maryland recommits itself to creating equitable, inclusive, and diverse curricula and spaces. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. James Boyle is the William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor of Law at Duke's Law School. His books include The Public Domain, Enclosing the Commons of the Mind, Shamans, Software, and Spleens, Law and the Construction of Information Society, and most recently, The Line, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Personhood. Jennifer Jenkins is a clinical professor of law at Duke's Law School and the director of the Center for the Study of the Public Domain. Jenkins is the author of Music, Copyright, Creativity, and Culture from Oxford University Press this year, which offers an interdisciplinary analysis of how law, economics, culture, and creativity shape one another in the world of music. Together, Boyle and Jenkins have collaborated on influential projects designed to make copyright law more accessible to both students and the public. They have co-authored an open coursebook, Intellectual Property, Law and the Information Society, Cases and Materials, now in its sixth edition. They also created two scholarly comic books, Bound by Law, question mark, which examines copyright and fair use in documentary filmmaking, and my personal favorite, Theft, A History of Music, which is an exploration of musical borrowing and regulation. This afternoon, Professors Boyle and Jenkins will look ahead to the work scheduled to enter the public domain in 2026 and reflect on what these yearly editions mean for creativity, preservation, and cultural vitality. Please join me in welcoming James Boyle and Jennifer Jenkins.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's,
Thanks for having us.
yeah.
Thanks, Diana. Thank you, Jess.
I'm seeing all kinds of cool reaction emojis that I didn't even know Zoom had added, and I now desperately need to master them myself. Thanks very much, everybody. This is kind of our archivists, people who work in the arts, people who work in libraries, people who work in academia. These are all people who tend to be drawn to our work, and not for a good reason, generally. Generally, the reason that people encounter copyright is because it's a pain in the ass, because it stops you from doing something that you want to do and you feel like you should be able to do as a law-abiding person, and somehow it makes it very hard. And what's more, when you read stories about copyright, some of you may have read the book or seen the movie Gone with the Wind, by Margaret Mitchell. The owners of the copyright in that book thought that they could prohibit an African-American author from retelling the story of Gone with the Wind from the slave's perspective. They thought copyright allowed them to stop them. And a federal district court judge agreed and said that the book should be pulped. I'm glad to say that the distinguished person sitting to my right was one of the lawyers who stopped that from happening. But it's not exactly a good look, right? I mean, in the United States, supposedly the proud bearer of the First Amendment, you can't retell the story of the glorification and romanticization of slavery in the antebellum South. You can stop a Black novelist from saying that. Or when people learn about how long copyright lasts, life plus 70. So the students who are assiduously copying down notes from this, their cameras only turned off to aid them in the process of composition, creative work, I'm sure. They look like a healthy lot. Their work isn't going to go into the public domain until their lives, say another 60 years plus 70 years after that. And that makes you, all of us, unique in cultural history, because we are the first, or maybe I should say, I belong to the first, you're maybe in the second or third generation to deny our history to ourselves. Every other human being that has lived on Earth has had a reasonable expectation that while there'll be many obstacles to them acquiring cultural objects, acquiring culture, literacy, denial of access to libraries, all of those things, all vitally important, they would have assumed that the law, at least, would not tell them that it was illicit to reprint books published 50 years ago, 100 years ago. In fact, every other generation has been able to assume that the works that were created in their lifetime would also, and were created by their peers, their contemporaries, would also come into the public domain in their lifetime. When the United States first had a copyright system, it was 14 years, renewable for another 14 if you wanted, right? Most people didn't. Even as recently as the 1970s, it was 28 plus 28. Think of how many things would be in the public domain. But that's just the narrow issue of copyright and the way that it regulates culture. I think there's a broader issue, which is intellectual property is something that used not to regulate human beings. It regulated corporate activities because corporations had printing presses and they had broadcast towers and they had newspapers and they had movie studios. And those were the entities that could do the things that copyright regulates. Copyright regulates reproducing, making derivative works, distributing. It would have been crazy to imagine, even as recently as the 1970s, that ordinary human beings would promiscuously be doing that all day long. I bet that there isn't anyone in this audience that can actually easily spend a day not doing something that copyright regulates. Every use of your devices, every text you say, every posting on social media is likely to involve stuff that is wrapped in copyright. And copyright wasn't designed for you. It was designed for corporate entities who were represented by the people who, the very well paid people, who we train. And it did a decent, not great, but decent job at doing that. But when it suddenly got dropped into regular informal culture, it brought all kinds of things in its wake. The second thing was, it used to be that you had to register your copyright to get it. Then later we made it like a little easier. Then you just at least had to put the C and your name and the year, at least to indicate, I want this to be copyrighted. We abolished that. So what does that mean? That means that every creative, expressive work fixed in material form that you create in your lifetime is copyrighted. You probably give no thought to that. It's a silly little movie. It's something that you made at a birthday party. It's a poem. You wrote, a love text to your sweetheart, right? But now those things are all coated in copyright. And what that means is presumptively they're off limits for as much as 130 years. So imagine the poor documentarian trying to tell to tell about the lives of people living today. And assume, well, home movies, video, they're always doing this. And then going, oh, who owns that? Do I need to get clearance? And there is no one more risk averse. Lawyers are risk averse. There is no one more risk averse than a university general counsel. They're like, oh, no, you can't do that. Wait, you're showing Super 8 movies taken during segregation in the American South to document what the daily life of Black folk was like? No, 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 no. You can't do that kind of stuff. That would be in the public interest. So the thing that this indicates is that there was the need for, I would say, three layers of things. First of all, we had to understand what the public domain was and the role that it had in creativity and culture. It wasn't just the sort of gummy residue that was left off when all the good stuff had been copyrighted, right? So we needed a theoretical understanding that actually explained the economics, the property, the politics, and the culture of it all. And the second thing was we needed some kind of movement that would help explain to ordinary people, hey, over here, copyright is important. I'm in favor. But it's not the only side of the picture. It's like thinking only industrial development is important, not the ecology, right? It's you got to understand both, right? And then the third thing was to produce a set of tools which would help make copyright work for people. Creative Commons was one of the things that I helped to start, which tries to do that. But the greatest thing that I ever did was to do none of these, but rather to have Jennifer Jenkins, who became the director of the Center for the Study of the Public Domain at Duke, which is the only, to our knowledge, the only center of its kind anywhere in the world. Millions of intellectual property centers, one studying the public domain. And what Jennifer did was to make Public Domain Day her own, to commemorate and to glorify the moment every year when works finally on January 1st enter the public domain. And that's the story that she's going to tell to you now.
Thanks, Jamie, for that introduction. So Public Domain Day, when we started the Center for the Study of the Public Domain in 2002, no published works were going into the public domain because in its infinite wisdom in 1998, Congress added 20 years to the copyright term. So you're going to start that. That was right. 20 years to the copyright term. So all the works that were set to go into the public domain in 1999 did not go into the public domain until 2019. So we actually started celebrating Public Domain Day in 2010 as a counterfactual. Nothing was going into the public domain in the United States. And so we created a website talking about what could have gone into the public domain and how exciting it would be if we still had the copyright term that Jamie mentioned up until 1978, 28 years with an optional renewal of 28 years. So, maybe some of you were looking at our website, maybe some copyright enthusiasts, they're out there were looking at our website for the first 9 years. But then the public domain reopened in 2019. And a piece of good news, it was very gratifying. People got excited. It blew, I mean, copyright lasts so long. Jimmy was talking about 130 years. For older works, the term is almost 100 years. It's 95 years. It blew people's minds that copyright was expiring over anything. And then in the next 6 years, since 2019, we had the first iteration of Mickey Mouse. We had the early Winnie the Pooh. We had the Great Gatsby. We had all of these exciting works going to the public domain. And we were off to the races. And so what I'm going to treat you to with the PowerPoint that you see on your screen is some of the highlights from our article this year, which is not up yet. So you're the first people who are going to see what we get in the public domain in less than a month, January 1st, 2026. So here's your sneak peek. Here's your special preview. Here's what we get to celebrate next year. And here's what it means. So let's start. I'm an English major. I'm also a music person, but I'm an English major. So I got to start with books, but I'm going to get to music and I'm going to talk about art. And I'm going to talk about film. So just hold on to your horses. So here's our montage of some of the highlights that are going to enter the public domain next year. Under the copyright term for older works, not the Life Plus 70 term for more recent works, but for these older works from before 1978, the term is 95 years after publication. And then those works go to the public domain January 1st the next year. So to figure it out, you add 96 years to the year. So works from 1930, published in 1930, those are the ones that are going to go into the public domain next year. And so you can see some highlights there. What was going on in 1930? The lingering shadow of World War I was still influencing a lot of the art, and you can see All Quiet on the Western Front there. And also, we were in the midst of the Great Depression in the United States, which had just started in October the year before. So some of the literary highlights, English majors there. Faulkner, William Faulkner, brilliant work, As I Lay Dying. The title actually borrowed from Homer's The Odyssey. It's one of the lines in there. Agatha Christie, mystery fans, The Murder at the Vicarage. This is the first appearance of Miss Marple in one of her novels. And the book version, not the serialized version, the book version of the detective story, The Maltese Falcon, which has some cringe language in it, but it's a really good story. For science fiction fans, we've got Last and First Men. For fans of psychoanalysis, the German version of Freud's Civilization and its Discontents. For poetry fans, T.S. Eliot's Ash Wednesday. And then really some exciting works from young adult and children's fiction. So we get the first 4 Nancy Drew novels will be in the public domain next year. The Little Engine That Could. So this story had been circulating around, the little happy engine that pulls the train over the hill because the engine thought it could. But this is the first really popular illustrated version from Watty Piper that's going to go into the public domain. And finally, the very first appearance of the characters Dick and Jane that you might be familiar with. Let's get to movies. And so sound films were relatively new. We have some films from recognizable superstars, directors, writers, and I already mentioned the Best Picture winner that year was All Quiet on the Western Front, an anti-war movie. The Marx Brothers were huge at the time. Their movie Animal Crackers will be public domain.
They're still huge. I resemble that remark.
Still love the Marx Brothers. And then sound film was so exciting. Imagine this was just most people had only seen silent films. And so like the phenomenon that you could actually like hear things in film was awesome. And so we had a lot of musical reviews. And so King of Jazz is going to be in the public domain. And that's Bing Crosby's very first appearance on film. And then, I mean, who doesn't love Marlene Dietrich? She's amazing. And so there's 2 films featuring her going into the public domain. This one, Morocco, has both Gary Cooper and Ms. Dietrich in it. Greta Garbo, of course, one of her films is going to be public domain. And finally, John Wayne. I'm hoping our students go back and forth on whether they've heard of John Wayne. But if you haven't heard of John Wayne, go watch one of his movies. His first leading role in The Big Trail is going into the public domain. This film's wild. Yeah, you see it right. It's written by Rube Goldberg. So Soup to Nuts, which is the first appearance on film of Larry and Moe, who would later be famous for being part of the Three Stooges, and they're hilarious. And so that film's in the public domain, going to go into the public domain. Hitchcock, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's film Murder. And finally, so this film is co-written by Salvador Dali. It was very controversial at the time. It's a really surrealist, avant-garde film called L'Âge d'Or, French. That's going to be public domain. So a lot to look forward to. People have gotten really excited about the characters that newly enter the public domain. So you may have noticed a couple of years ago, Steamboat Willie, and a couple of years before that, Winnie the Pooh. Well, guess who's entering the public domain next year? Yes, it's the first iteration of Betty Boop. Check out her signature phrase and dance. So you may be wondering why her earlobe's so big, or why is she wearing those trippy earrings? In this first appearance, she's actually technically an anthropomorphic dog. She's kind of a poodle character, and there's her droopy, floppy dog ears. And her expressions kind of morph in fascinating ways between human and animalistic. And that's her boyfriend there, who immediately falls in love with her, the chef of this restaurant in this Dizzy Dishes cartoon. His name is Bimbo. But you can see that she's Betty Boop. She's wearing the Betty Boop outfit. She says boop, boop, ba-doop. And so that iteration of the Betty Boop character will be going into the public domain. This is from Fleischer Studios, and I encourage you to go watch it. It's called Dizzy Dishes. They had wonderfully surreal, bizarre, awesome animation, which contrasted at the time to the kind of animation that we were getting from Walt Disney. So Betty Boop is, in fact, an anthropomorphic dog in her first appearance. Well, what's going to the public domain from Disney? An actual dog. This is Rover, who was later renamed Pluto. Pluto you may be familiar with. So unlike Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, a lot of the characters from Disney, Rover was the first character who was just a dog. Rover's not anthropomorphic. He's a good boy, and he's a pet dog, and he's very cute, and he does dog things. And so here's one of Rover's first appearances. Very different style of animation, less surreal, adorable. We're going to get Rover Pluto next year, and there's a lot of excitement about that. Apparently, the top 6 characters from Disney still today include Mickey and Minnie Mouse and Pluto, Rover the dog. So I don't know how many of the young people have seen this comic strip. I've certainly seen this comic strip, but the very first comic strips from Blondie, the Blondie comic, are going into the public domain next year, featuring Ms. Blondie and Dagwood. But the funny thing is, if you remember the ones that I read, they're married, she's really responsible, they're domestic, they have kids. Not at the beginning. So these two characters, with the versions of the characters that are going to be public domain, Blondie's still a party girl. In fact, she's still single. Her name is Blondie Boopadoop, after the Boop Boop type characters. And Dagwood's still single too. There's Blondie meeting his dad. And he hasn't yet discovered his signature big giant sandwich, because apparently that's a married guy thing. And so he doesn't start making the sandwiches until he's married. So that's later on. So this is the single version of these two characters, and they are going into the public domain. I know there's some music people, including Jess, on this Zoom. So what compositions are we getting next year? Think about just how familiar these still are. So I Got Rhythm from George and Ira Gershwin, featuring the famous chord progression that's fundamental to so much jazz and so much music. The rhythm changes. We have Georgia on My Mind, later made famous in a recording by Ray Charles. This is just the underlying composition. The music and the lyrics is going into the public domain. We've got Embraceable You, also by Gershwin. And then if any of you remember this from When Harry Met Sally, a movie that was big in my era, but not for me, also public domain. SpongeBob SquarePants fans, this song was featured in the very first episode. I'm told, my research assistant told me this, I didn't know this, but anyway, Living in the Sunlight is going to be public domain. Yeah, this one, there was a song about players playing before Taylor Swift and her predecessors, Just a Gigolo, the English translation. public domain, Dream a Little, Dream of Me, and Beyond the Blue Horizon, which actually was the inspiration for the theme from Star Trek, if we have any Trekkies out there. If you are interested in learning more about music and copyright, by the way, Jess mentioned this, and she mentioned Theft: A History of Music. Earlier this year, Oxford published a more in-depth look, but plain English and non-lawyerly look at all the complexities in the wonderful world of music and copyright. This is my new book that tries to demystify some of the things you may have read about in the press, the Ed Sheeran case, the blurred lines case, the sampling cases. It's all there. Finally, sound recordings, just to get especially complicated, are under a different term than other kinds of copyrighted works. And so a new law from 2018 called the Music Modernization Act established a 100-year term for sound recordings. And so the sound recordings that we're getting next year are from 1925, not 1930. The one I'm the most excited about is Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, the unbelievably haunting, beautiful version by the civil rights icon and contralto Marian Anderson. We also get a couple of recordings, well, many recordings from Bessie Smith, including You've Been a Good Old Wagon. She also had an unbelievable voice. Like, try to listen and not have the hairs on your arm stand up. We've got Yes, Sir, That's My Baby by Gene Austen. And then we have the Harlem Globetrotters song, which I'm thinking
It's all good.
Anyway,
move on.
Moving on. Anyway, by Ben Burney. So why do we care? Jamie set this up partly already. Yeah, these famous works are going into the public domain. We talk about them January 1st of every year. People get excited. But you know what's more exciting are all of the works people haven't heard of. These famous works are just the tip of the iceberg. But the problem with the enormously long copyright term is it far, far, far outlasts the commercial viability, the commercial lifespan of most creativity. I mean, think about every piece of art, not just art that you're going to the movie theater to see, but think about everything that was created this year. How many things do you think anyone's still going to be selling out there in 100 years? And so what the public domain enables is the rediscovery, access, preservation of all of these works that might otherwise have been forgotten from almost a century ago. And you know, you're at the Center for Archival Futures. I think that's what you do. So part of the excitement on Public Domain Day are the thousands upon thousands of works that we can rediscover and share freely because copyright is not going to get in the way and be a pain in the ass, to quote Jamie. But also the public domain feeds creativity, right? So just look around you at some of the movies this year. What's Wicked based on? The Wonderful World of Oz, the public domain books from L. Frank Baum, and also, yes, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein keeps getting remade. And so a lot of you may have already seen Del Toro's version from this year. This is an example of how the public domain feeds creativity. Dickens, Shakespeare, Jane Austen, all of the public domain works that people keep making into their own creations and adding their own stories. So I'm going to conclude with this quote, which actually starts our celebration this year. So one of the works going to the public domain is by W. Somerset Maugham. It's called Cakes and Ale, which is a line from The Tempest in Shakespeare. But I was looking at all these wonderful things from 1930, and I started thinking about generative AI. Because, you know, we're looking back at these works at a time when we're really questioning what sets us apart from machines. Because we used to think that language and art and books and paintings were things that were uniquely human. And of course, that's not true anymore. So I was looking back at this quote. Jamie he actually gave me this quote. And back a long time ago, Mom wrote, I have an idea that the only thing that makes it possible to regard this world we live in without disgust is the beauty which now and then we create out of chaos. The pictures we paint, the music we compose, the books we write, the lives we lead. And I was looking at that and I was thinking, well, look at all of these books, this music, this picture. What is it that makes us uniquely human? Maybe it's the lives that we lead that are reflected in all of these creative works from 1930. Maybe that's the perfect work of art. That's something that's still uniquely human. That's still the beautiful life. And, you know, we're kind of living in a chaotic moment right now. And so my hope is that we can all still create beauty now and then out of chaos. And so that's my preview of next year's Public Domain Day and my final thought. James?
Fantastic. I think it might be good for us to move pretty quickly to, yeah, stop share, thank you. Move pretty quickly to questions. I'll just add a few things that build on what Jennifer did. So a lot of you, if you're thinking about who would be opposed to the public domain, probably number one on your list would be the Walt Disney Corporation. And so try and name a Walt Disney movie that wasn't made from a public domain source. Walt Disney, ironically, despite the fact that they're one of the companies that has made our copyright term or helped to make our copyright term so very, very long, has drawn on the public domain itself. Its practice is to say the public domain is vital for creativity. If you focus not on what people say, but on what they do, the Walt Disney Company is the biggest advocate for the public domain. And for a lot of us, a lot of people say, well, I've got lots of access to stuff. It's on somewhere on TikTok, it's on YouTube. And even if it's, not supposed to be up there, there'll be a takedown notice, a frowny face. I'll get more access. I'll get it eventually. And I mean, we've had the most access to the most cultural material of any generation in history. So why are we telling the sad side of the story? Well, I'm Scottish. I'm required to tell the sad side of any story. But beyond that, I think it's because what people are not understanding is that the access the public domain gives is not the fleeting access. It's not just, well, I can copy this riff from this song and I'm not a big enough deal that anyone's going to actually, come after me, or, I mashed up this thing and, it'll at least stay up for a week or so, but my friends thought it was really funny. And the thing was that wasn't the way that prior generations encountered it. They encountered material that they knew was free and would remain free. That Shakespeare didn't get to veto when they made when the movie of a version of The Tempest, Forbidden Planet, was made. Didn't get to veto West Side Story. Didn't get to veto any of these remakings. And Jennifer, for those who are interested, can give many other examples of great works that have been remade and reimagined to tell the stories of today. One line that I thought Jennifer was going to use, which is from my fellow ex-Creative Commons board member, Hal Abelson, was, what does it mean to be human if you don't have a shared culture? And what's a culture if you can't share it? And so it seems to me that that's why the public domain is important. And it's important for us as people who, as Jennifer say, want to create beauty and to experience the beauty of history. Thanks very much. And we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Jamie. Everyone, well, yeah, I see everyone is already going ahead and thank you with all of these responses here. Let me see. As is tradition, we typically hold our first question for one of our students. So, UMD students in the room, if you have a question, please feel free to unmute. And if you'd like to put one in the chat, I will keep monitors of the chat, and we're looking forward to a lively discussion here.
Somebody got it. Thanks.
All right, I will open it up. Oh, here we go. Edison, why don't you go ahead? You can feel free to unmute.
Yeah, you guys mentioned that Walt Disney, he like was the biggest supporter of the public domain, and it's such a big corporation, and usually big corporations like they like to benefit. So and so who benefits from items like not being in public domain or like restriction to public domain? I know like because recently the public domain just came back after it was gone for a while. So who's benefiting during the period?
It's a great question, Edison. Thanks. So here's the answer. It's like you can understand who is going to want to extend copyright. The vast majority of copyrighted works don't have any commercial life after even 4 or 5 years, let alone after 50, let alone after 100, right? So for books, it's something, the majority of books are actually orphan works. We don't even know who owns the copyright. For the vast majority of works of art, nobody is making money, and you can't buy it even if you wanted to. So the commercial, the fact that it's under copyright benefits no one, just hurts them. But there are a few companies, individuals who've won the lottery. Those are the people whose books are still selling. I'm sure J.K. Rowling's heirs will be making money off Harry Potter in 130 years. Mickey Mouse, which, by the way, drew on all kinds of public domain sources in order to be created. Mickey Mouse emerged into the public domain only very recently. All right. And so the people who say we should extend copyright term, they know they've won the lottery, right? They're the fraction of a 1% whose works are still commercially valuable after this huge amount of time. But what they do is that they say, oh, and all the other stuff too, that's also going to be locked up so I get my monopoly rent. Now, I actually don't begrudge them the money, right? If people still think their work's valuable, great, let them buy it. I just think it's so sad that they put all of the rest of our culture, they pull it back into copyright and keep it there in order so that this tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of works can benefit. So that's the answer to your question. Who benefits? It's the people whose works have that long commercial value.
So these tiny fraction of people, they have such a large power in their
Correct.
Wow.
Exactly. And there's if you do any poli-sci courses in your degree.
This is to Bob's point on in the chat.
Yeah, so there's a concept called collective action problems. Manker Olson comes up with, and what Olson is a very common sense point, which he expresses quite brilliantly in a theory, which is basically if you have a single industry or individual that really cares about one issue, right, and it cares about it a lot, and it has money behind it. And then you have all of us, and we have lots of issues that we care about, right? We care about the environment, we care about culture, we care about, our favorite sports teams, we care about on and on and on and on. Even though collectively our interests vastly outweigh that one concentrated interest, when it comes to lobbying, guess which one is going to win out, right? And that's just,
The
I mean,
one
that's
with
just
the most money.
Yeah, the one with most money, or even just the one that speaks the loudest. I mean, some people are single issue, and I'm not putting this down. They really care about one issue. And so if you have a group that cares intensely about one issue, and that's all they care about politically, they will have political influence out of proportion to their numbers. So that's what's going on here. In this book, The Public Domain, which, by the way, Manker Olson, I said.
Diane was asking.
Sorry, Manker, Mancur, Olson, Olsen, I believe. If you're interested, I would be hypocritical if I didn't give you access to this for free. You can download this book for free, public domain, Closing the Commons of the Mind. And it kind of explains how, in response to what Edison's saying, it's not just the money. That's the really interesting thing. It becomes a kind of ideology that takes on a life of its own. Right. And so it's a lot of people say, it's the big corporation. And of course, that's part of it. But there's actually people become to believe this. It becomes an article of faith that the only thing that produces creativity is locking things up, not ever letting things free. And that's one of the things we try in our center to show that isn't that true.
Yeah, people often, I mean, we create and you create, people often think, well, copyright's great, which it is. That's why we dedicated our lives to it. So if copyright's great, maybe more copyright, longer copyright is automatically better. My analogy, which we discovered when we were growing our garden during the pandemic, is plants like water. Water is great. That doesn't mean you should just keep drowning them in water all day. At a certain point, the term is just too long, particularly when it keeps people from being able to use older creative works in their own creativity. I thought I'd answer Bob's question in the chat too, because he mentioned what's going to stop Congress from doing this again. And I get asked that a lot around this time of year when people read the Public Domain Day articles. I don't think we get another term extension for a few reasons. The term extension from 1998 part of the rationale or justification for that was that we were harmonizing our term with the term in some other developed jurisdictions, such as the European Union. And so their term was life plus 70. And so we said, oh, well, we'll make our term life plus 70. And if we were to extend our term again, we would be out of sync with the rest of the world, one. And two, one of the really exciting things about being part of this field is now, this conversations like this show there's a much greater understanding of the harms caused by the long copyright term. And I actually do think there would be more resistance now if we were to say, oh, life plus 70, let's make it life plus 90. Just to take one example, the phenomenon of culture that literally is lost forever because of the length of the copyright term. So I'm thinking of films and sound recordings that were on substrates that literally deteriorated, decayed. They're gone forever. We'll never see them again. And it was the long copyright term in part that was preventing preservationists who were risk-averse, like University Council and like lawyers, from copying, from preserving those films when they could, because they didn't want to be, they didn't want to be copyright infringers. And so just stories like that, I think there's a much broader understanding now of the harms caused by the long term. And so I don't think we're going to see another term extension.
Let me see. I'll read. Thank you so much for those answers. I'll read Joe's question in the chat. Do you think that the public would benefit if the U.S. Copyright Office was more fee-based, like the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, rather than largely publicly funded as it currently is? Yeah, I'll add there. I know that the Copyright Office, to register something for copyright, there are fees, but they are fairly low.
Yep.
Right. But the thing about copyright is that it adheres immediately on fixation. So you need to register your copyright to go sue someone, but everything that you have ever created, everything that everyone on this call has ever created, assuming it had a minimal level of creativity, and okay, so once you get beyond, shopping list, then you're pretty much hitting it, is copyrighted, regardless of whether you wanted it or not. So Joe's point's kind of a deep one. Couldn't we require fees, or at least require people to say, copyright Joe Penza, right? And the dates, right? Just do that little thing, which would be wonderful. Unfortunately, we are signatories to an international convention called the Berne Convention, which forbids us from having any kind of copyright formalities. They did that for a good reason. They wanted to make sure that poorer artists, less educated artists, wouldn't be denied copyright because they didn't know to do that. Great. But they just didn't imagine. They came up with that requirement before everyone had basically a movie studio and a recording studio in their pockets, right? So they just couldn't imagine what that would do to the vast amount of culture that would be produced that people, frankly, would be very happy to share. To the vast amount. I mean, think of the number of people who create for reasons completely unrelated to money. Wikipedia, right? I mean, like it's out there. So it's a great question, Joe. I would love to see the formality requirement come back. People have tried to think about how to get around that requirement, and actually one idea went close to yours, which is, what if we didn't say it was a formality, but it said it was a tax, that if you wanted to renew your copyright, you had to pay 50 cents. Just 50, like some completely nominal amount. And I think that would be a great effect. But unfortunately, because of this ideology that I described, even though that would have no effect whatsoever on the large corporations, because they have their lawyers, they'll file for their renewals. There's no need for them to worry. They see that as an attack in the same way as someone said, I'm against private property or something, right? So they see it as an attack, not as a rationalization to say, hey, look, you keep your system. It's working great for you. Good, good, good. Just let the rest of us opt out. And so they view it as more of an attack on a worldview, which is why, going back to Edison's question, that it is more than just their interests, because their monetary interests are perfectly well dealt with.
Connor has a question that'll be near and dear to your heart, since you were one of the people who started Creative Commons.
Yes, absolutely.
You got the right person on this call.
It'd be still my heart, Connor. Yes, absolutely. So copyleft licenses, for those of you who don't know, sometimes called viral licenses, although people and some people in the movement don't like that term, is basically licenses like the one that our textbooks are under, that the comic book theft is under, and that this is under, in fact. And those are licenses which say, hey, listen, you can copy this. That's a freedom I give you as the author, so long as you do so non-commercially. But you can also make derivative works. So if you wanted to translate this into another language, you don't need to ask me permission. Permission has already been given. But, and this is the copy left part, you then have to pass on the freedom I gave you to the next community. So if you translate it into Italian, good for you, but it has to be translated into Italian so that given to the people who are reading Italian, so that they get it with that same degree of freedom, so they could translate it into another language. And so that I think is very powerful. And it's something that I care a great deal about. It's called the share alike license in Creative Commons. And I think what that does is it enables the kind of creative reuse, which any creative community finds itself doing, whether you're talking about jazz, whether you're talking about rap, whether you're talking about freestyling poetry, whether you're talking about skateboarders picking up tips from each other, magicians, right? They all take from other people, but try and tip the hat, and then offer it back with the same freedoms they got. So yes, I think that has huge potential, and I'm really excited about the fact that some people have, remade stuff that we made, translated it into other languages, and we're just delighted about it.
Couldn't agree more. And I just wanted to brag on him. He's one of the people who started Creative Commons with Hal Abelson. So there's an advocacy question, which is interesting because I wonder if some of you are part of movements, advocacy on the part of archivists and librarians to sort of, mitigate, as the poster says, copyright constraints on preservation.
Yeah, and I'm looking both at Adam's question and Katrina's question, which really bring up the same point. And so, first of all, I think the advocacy stuff isn't for everyone and doesn't need to be. People just do what they find they have time for and they have energy for. And I'm not out to preach that you must get on this bandwagon. There are many other causes, and some of them are of literally existential importance to us as a species. So, but I do think that librarians and archivists have maybe some resources that they don't fully realize even themselves. I mean, I always say librarians and archivists are my heroes, and when I say this to a group of librarians and archivists, they generally laugh, as if that was a funny idea. I don't know why. Like, why would you not be you're literally preserving the culture of my species for future generations, and you're the people that I got it from the last generation. Why wouldn't I be going, thank you, right? So I think with that comes both some credibility, because people go, okay, well, you have an axe to grind, but it's a really important axe, and some degree of professional standing where you can say, look, I'm just saying to you as an archivist, this is what I want to give your children. This is what I want to give your community. And these are the things that are getting in my way. Now, there may be some reasons for that. I'm just telling you what I want to do, and it seems like I should be able to do it. And I think just saying that in a non-shrill, just very sort of straightforward way is something that I think is very powerful. And certainly, like I said, archivists and librarians are my heroes.
Bob says to actively pursue fair use too.
Well, I did say this at an international conference of librarians, and everyone sort of agreed with me that they aren't often seen as heroes, but the Brazilian and Argentinian librarians strongly dissented, and that they felt the theme of the librarian who at first seems shy and retiring, but becomes a dramatic character is actually a really important one in film. So I wisely deferred to their greater knowledge.
Oh, it's a shout out to the Internet Archive.
Yay!
Yeah, that's right.
That's a great thing. So Jennifer will be on the Internet Archive celebration.
22nd, come to the Internet Archive Public Domain Day celebration.
And we love the remix contest.
Yep.
I'll actually be doing a talk.
On the 18th?
Well, it's on the 18th when they broadcast it or whatever. I don't know, but
okay.
yeah,
Well, he's going to be doing it.
I'm actually going to be talking about this book, which it's sort of a, you know, what I wrote it back in 2008. How's the world changed for the better or for the worse? And those things I think are just super exciting. Jennifer, every year, well, do you know if they're doing it this year, the NPR music contest?
Oh yeah, the WNYC does a public song contest, which is sort of in the same vein, which is really fun, where they invite people to use any public domain stuff, you know, public domain poem from ages ago, but to make a song, to perform a song and send it in. And I'm one of the judges for that. And so if you are musically talented and you want to write your own song using something in the public domain, I encourage you to enter WNYC's public song contest.
And I mean,
some of the stuff is awesome.
The songs are banging. I mean,
some of them are hilarious.
They're funny. The tunes are memorable.
Profound.
The lyrics can be witty. I mean, yeah. And by the way, Bob, thank you for the lovely shout out to Duke's website. Jennifer is literally creating the new version of Public Domain Day, and that will be up. That will be up soon.
We're really trying to get it out the door. So you got the preview, but it'll be up soonish.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions from? I'm particularly interested in questions from students in any of your classes. Like, you have two relatively tame lawyers here, you know, and it's always interesting for us to get questions about intellectual property or copyright, because it also gives a sense of like what popular consciousness about it is. So don't feel like, you know, your question, you know, might seem uninformed or whatever. That actually is super important data. So if anybody out there has a question, feel free.
So I was talking about attribution, which is really interesting.
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. So Stuart says, seems like the need or role for attribution gets wrongly mixed up with fair use or public domain in the popular debate. Absolutely right. So think about two things. One is copyright infringement. So if you make a copy of Taylor Swift's most recent album and try and stream it yourself, you're violating copyright. And the fact that you say, this is by the awesome Taylor Swift, doesn't change a darn thing. If you take one of Shakespeare's sonnets and submit it for your poetry exercise in English composition, giving your own name and not Shakespeare's, you certainly aren't violating copyright, because there wasn't even copyright when Shakespeare wrote those sonnets. But you're plagiarizing because you're failing to give correct attribution. So plagiarism and the sort of moral regulation of attribution is one set of issues, and the copyright issues are the others. There are countries in which they are mixed, the so-called droit d'auteur countries, where attribution is one of the fundamental rights of the copyright holder. And there's some debate about whether or not the United States adequately recognizes attribution rights in this country, because we're obliged to under the Berne Convention. But by and large, I couldn't agree with you more. They get conflated.
Diane's just gotten the clearance from her students, I think, to ask a question.
Yeah, Diane, I mean, if you got to ask a question, who can?
Well, and I wonder actually if it's at this sort of like intersection you were just talking about, but you asked the question of who else might oppose the public domain, and also sort of in the vein of the advocacy conversation. I work mostly with Indigenous collections and Indigenous issues. And so there's lots of debates about sort of how to protect, you know, the different kinds of knowledge that like maybe should never have been under certain kinds of like Western copyright, and how to sort of like alternative forms of restorative licensing or traditional knowledge labels or attributions, as you were just mentioning. So I'm curious about like, are there other, you know, thinking about the other end of the spectrum from like sort of big corporate entities, other kinds of actors or communities, spaces where there are needs to put guardrails around like the public domain, and like how you sort of think about that in your work?
That's a great question.
Yep, and you thought a lot about that when you were doing the TK stuff.
Yeah, I wrote a book called Shamans, Software, and Spleens, and the shamans in the title refers to the fact that traditional knowledge in lots of areas, as you know better than I, but traditional knowledge in terms of culture, in terms of patterns, in terms of music, in terms of dance, but also in terms of ethnobotany. The way, this is the herb we use to treat this thing, right? Which is often a very fruitful beginning for pharmaceutical companies, and they then modify those. They can't just patent them themselves, but they modify them and then patent the results. And a lot of people think that, for very good reason, that there have been inadequate protections of traditional knowledge. And I think that that's true for all kinds of reasons, simple justice. And, if you want the rainforest and the knowledge of the people who live in the rainforest continued, then maybe, allowing some revenue source to flow back there is not a bad idea. So there's even a cold-hearted set of reasons that are in favor of it. But I will send up two warning flares. The first is that sometimes those can be deeply in tension with our norms of free speech. So that you may have a particular community, and it may be that the people who are in power of that community are actually a relatively small percentage of the actual community, who think that X knowledge should be the preserve of one group, and who think that they should have the power of law to literally punish anyone who spreads that knowledge. That runs into some pretty fundamental norms that I believe in terms of freedom of speech and individual liberty. Self-expression also, it really gets involved in community disputes inside those communities, which aren't, of course, monolithic, and where there are differing views, and you need to be respectful of the differing views, not just the views of the people who are in power at the top. So, aruga, warning sign number one. Warning sign number two, I initially proposed that this, might be a good idea, something that we should think about doing. The World Intellectual Property Organization is actually considering a traditional knowledge treaty. To be honest, I'm sorry to say that I think that it has largely been a distraction, that it has been something, a sort of sop, a palliative that developed countries give in the hope of getting the world to agree to intellectual property rules that favor the people who are currently in a good position. And in addition, I'm not sure property is the right tool to solve the problem, right? It's sort of like, having said that there's a problem, it may be what we want is, attribution, for example. Yes, we're glad you think our music is beautiful, but you should be acknowledging whose music it is, right? Ditto with it may be that the answer is through tax and transfer, where we don't say you get to own this. And the analogy that I give, Diana, is to privacy. You've probably heard people saying, oh, it'd be great if I just owned my own data. And every time I interact with a privacy policy from Meta or whatever, I tend to have that reaction too. And then I think about what that would actually mean, and it would be a nightmare. It would be even worse than our current situation, because property just isn't the right kind of tool for what we want to do there. And so, yes, there are genuine, huge concerns, but two modest warning signs in dealing with those concerns.
And I thought I'd give a shout out to two colleagues. If you want to go read about it, our colleague at Harvard, William Terry Fisher, has actually written in the Duke Law Journal about the puzzle of traditional knowledge, where he gives a deeply contextual account of very different scenarios and how you might try to ensure revenue sharing or that sort of
wonderful
thing.
article.
And
Fantastic article.
It's a very good article. And another person we worked with, Jane Anderson, has written extensively about indigenous and traditional knowledge. So there's definitely a fair amount of scholarship and thinking, very sophisticated, very nuanced thinking on how to deal with that question.
Fisher's in particular, and I think he's actually really something that could be given to a class, because what he does is, and Jennifer, thank you for reminding me, he gives lots of examples of, like, particular dances and the way that they've evolved and been used and remixed, and different cultures have brought things to them, and he's sort of like, and then it's like different scenarios, and I think our students were going, oh yeah, actually, that one's okay. I think that's good. This one's bad, and it's actually quite interesting in getting a very different, nuanced set of answers.
Yeah, it's very contextual. It's very nuanced.
Yeah, thank you for all. It's really, and I think those gnarly issues are exactly the issue of, like, property itself is already, like, not a construct that, like, comes from those traditions, right? So you have to,
Yep.
Okay, nobody wants us to
59?
register their domain names for them or find out whether they get to sample a particular song, you know. Okay, so
You can check out my book for that.
yeah, you can check out Jennifer's book. Hopefully
Well,
one.
thank you so much for this great talk and engaging conversation. Let me see. Are we happy to send more students your way with your email addresses if we have any follow-up questions?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. Well,
I will say,
okay.
if I get a bunch of emails right as I'm responding to my own students' question, frenzied
We're
questions,
starting exams.
we're starting
End of
exams.
semester.
So please understand our
Yeah.
bandwidth may be a little
Things are about to get real over
yeah.
here. And I
Yeah,
haven't finished
save
this
your
course
burning
yet.
questions for January.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much for this talk and for this great conversation we've been having. And thank you both for the amount of scholarship you have put out there. Certainly, books have made such a huge impact in my life and work, and I'm sure many others here. So everyone, please join me again in thanking Jennifer and Jamie for being here with us today. I'm just so thrilled to get to host you here.
Well, and thank you, Jessica and Diana. I mean, what wonderful hosts, and you know, we didn't know exactly what to expect, but this is absolutely fantastic. And unless you have the ability to generate lots of clapping hands, you know, rather than just one, then we're delighted by the reaction. So please keep in touch.
All
It was
right.
great.
Thank
It was
you
great
so much
seeing
for
you.
being
Thank you so
here.
much.
Awesome to meet you both.
Yes.
Okay, bye.